So, as Brent said, I'm going to talk about managing your team. This one is a bit trickier for me because I've seen team management happen a lot of different ways, both in the corporate world and in the church world. So again, I went back to, what are the questions that I'm asking over the years? What are people asking in this arena as I've read books on this? What are the questions behind it? And some of those are really simple questions, like what does it mean to manage your team well? What are the components that are necessary? What are the rhythms and things? Again, does church size matter? Is it different for different church sizes? Is it different for your team and your staff if they're paid or if they're volunteer, if they're full-time or part-time? The kind of makeup of your team. How do you manage the expectations that come on your team and managing your team well through these mixed expectations, both the expectations that they have on you, but also the expectations that they have on the church. And then what about all that interpersonal communication stuff that is always messing things up? How do you manage your team well with all of that? And then again, going back to the volunteers and the paid staff, what does it look like to manage them? Is it different? And then those different components and motivations in there and accountability in there. And then what does development look like for your team as you want to move things forward, and what role does development play? So I want to start with the why again. I think it's important that we always start with the why, and how we manage our team matters because ultimately I think it matters to God. Right? We're not just managing a team of people for a business. We're managing a team of people that are shepherding and shaping a church. So a couple verses. Acts 20, verse 28. Pay careful attention to yourself and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to care for the church of God, which he obtained with his own blood. There's some weight for you. How you manage your team matters because Jesus gave his life, shed his blood for that flock that you're shepherding, and you're in charge of those who are shepherding them. Hebrews 13, verse 7, remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. And then also in verse 17 of that same chapter, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you. As we look at these verses, it's like, oh man, so the people that we are shepherding are called to obey us, but also to obey the leaders that we are managing and shepherding. So there's some weight there. Ephesians chapter 4, 11 through 16. This is a familiar passage to many of us, right? And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. I don't know about you, but when I put on my lenses of leading in the church, not that the lens of, okay, what does this verse mean to me, but what does this verse mean to my people, and how does that call me to accountability of the staff that I'm managing and leading? There's some new light shed in a verse like that. How am I managing my staff in such a way that it brings unity? How am I managing my staff in such a way that it is building up the body of Christ? How am I managing my staff that has these different giftings? We're not all teachers. We're not all apostle types. We're not all. So I need to be managing my people different ways that have different kinds of giftings, to use those giftings to build those things up in my church, so that we are healthy, not just in an area, but in all the areas, and that all those different areas are unified for what? To be built up in love. So how we manage our team matters, and the scriptures point to this hugely, and it matters to God, and because it matters to the mission. Our bottom line, again, is not profit like the business world. It's people. It's the kingdom impact that we're having. And so passages like Ephesians 2:19 through 22, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. So this work that we are doing is building people up to be bricks in that holy temple in which the Spirit dwells. We aren't just managing any people, we are managing saints. Saints that are equipping others to be saints. So as I think of managing a team well, I think of it in trying to set up our churches, to do kingdom work, to have kingdom impact, to be on mission, to keep the mission, and to be champions of the mission, the vision, and the values that I spoke of yesterday, while also empowering and equipping and encouraging not just the staff and the volunteer staff, paid staff, volunteer staff, but also key leaders, volunteer leaders in the church to be champions of these things as well, and encouraging the team, again, towards those mission, vision, and values. So as we manage our team and lead our teams, a large part of it is that champion piece, is maintaining our eyes towards that target, and making sure that we're not wandering off course, that we're not 1 or 2 degrees off here or there, and then accomplishing that by equipping others to do that work. It's not just us leading the way and saying, follow me as I follow Christ, but also, hey, I need you to also shepherd others so that they follow you, and to multiply disciples. It's not just about making a disciple or a couple disciples. It's making disciples who then turn around and make more disciples. It's the process of multiplication and not just addition. And so, as I said yesterday, that target is that mission, vision, and values. Again, the mission being that universal mission that Christ gave all of us. And that is to make disciples, right? Matthew 28. And teaching them to do everything that Jesus commanded us, and reminding ourselves and them that he is with us even to the end of the age. And how do we go about doing that? Well, we go about doing that by loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so that mission is universal. And then when it comes to the vision, again, that's our future of what it looks like for us to carry that mission out in specific language that fits our culture, our time, our people. And so, for instance, for us at Northeast, our vision is to bring Jesus to every home in the northeast corner of San Antonio. It's aspirational, but it's doable with the Lord's help. And then we get to our values. Our values are those core things that are going to shape our people, our culture. It's going to be those guardrails that help us say no to certain things and yes to other things. And it's going to create a certain kind of disciple. Obviously, we're going to give them all the core pieces, but then how we color those core pieces is going to be shaped by our values. And it's a bit like family values, right? Not every family has the identical family values. Hopefully, there's these core pieces, right? Like there's these core pieces of being about the family and for the family. But some families value dinner around the table and some don't. Some families value sports while others value the arts. Some value going on vacation together. And it's okay if they don't value going on vacation together. There's other things that families can do to build relationship and spend time with one another. But for us as the church, right, there are some core pieces. There's Bible and prayer and community and discipleship. But how we go about those things, the language that's around that, that's going to be different for each of us. So our values are extremely important. If you don't have values, I want to encourage you to write those things out, to get those in front of your people. You don't have to start from scratch. You can look at the other churches in this room, look at their values, reword them to fit you. But I do want to encourage you to have values that are in your language, because if they won't naturally come out of your mouth as the senior leaders of your church, then you're not going to speak them. And if you don't speak them, they won't become your culture. And so they, in some ways, will become useless. And so make sure that your values are written in the kind of language that you and your strategic leaders speak. So now, apart from the mission, vision, values piece, I want to move to the whole versus a leadership team. Now, it makes sense that it matters to have mission or values for the whole church, but what about values for your staff team? Should you have values specifically for that staff team? And what does it look like to distill some of your church values into some sharper values for your staff team, or just not to have them at all? I think that it is hugely beneficial to have staff operational values. It sets the stage, it sets the expectation for your staff to know, oh, this is how we do things. Oh, this is the kind of staff that we are becoming. And your leadership team will then help shepherd and shape and disciple in this way, right? And it allows you to get a little bit tighter on those values. And the way I like to think about it is like this. We are reproducing ourselves in our leaders so that those leaders around us, those staff people and key volunteers, will then go and shepherd and disciple people that we won't. They have spheres of influence that we don't have. They're going to disciple people that would never be discipled by you. You may think every single person in this church would be willing to be discipled by you. I'm sorry to say, no, they won't. They may like your preaching, but when it comes to being challenged by you one-on-one or one-on-a-few, you're going to have people in your church that are like, nah, I'd rather have Jim disciple me. Or, nah, I think Karen would be better for me. And so what does that mean? That means for those staff people that you have, those key volunteers, you need to be pouring yourself into them, leadership, and those values. Because what that does is it unifies. All those passages that I read through, almost every single one of them talks about the unity and the importance of unity inside the church. So how do we accomplish that? Well, number one, we got to have the same target. We got to all be heading in the same direction. Now, how wide is that road in that direction? If you don't have values, it's wide open. If you have values, you're saying, here's the guardrails. And so for us, here's our church values, here's our staff values. That way, because people are going to veer a little bit outside those bounds. So for us, as I think about, okay, if my staff values are tighter, what that means is it gives them a little bit of freedom, and they're still well within the church values. And so that would be my challenge for you, because God has called us to build community. And our church to aim at making disciples and multiplying disciples in a very specific ways. The other piece for that is that God has also called us to this community in and being unified, but I also believe that he's not called us to do it alone. So that's the other reason to have values. Now, some of you guys in here are solo pastors, and it is my prayer that God has surrounded you with people to do this ministry with you, because there's nowhere in the Bible that I see that we're called to do this alone. I mean, even the Son of God didn't do this alone, right? He had his 12, and he had his 3 of those 12, and then really it was the 72 at the end. And so as I look at it, I'm like, man, Jesus had his core strategic team, he had his team, and then he had his kind of core team, church planning team that went along with him, and he changed the world. That's a great model. We need to not just live by the words of Jesus, we also need to live by the ways of Jesus, and one of the ways of Jesus was that. Now, I think there's freedom in the form somewhat of how small is your strategic team, or how big is it? There's some range there. And how big is your staff team? Well, yeah, there's some range there. And so there's freedom in the form, but definitely we can learn from the ways of Jesus in that. Now, a quick caveat here, the level of importance for our mission and our vision and our values is different, right? The mission of the church, that came directly from the Lord's lips. So yeah, that one's pretty clear. We ought not to mess with that. But when it comes to values, there's a lot of flexibility in that. And so, we're in the northeast corner of San Antonio. Those values are going to look way different than if you're up in Dallas, or look different than if you're in Houston. And so, as I talked about, our values and that, like, there's freedom in that form. So the other thing that I kind of want to name here too, in the sense of having values and managing your team with those values, is the benefit of having those values. I don't know if you've ever worked on a staff team that it's like working with your best friends. You're all moving in the same direction. You're speaking a lot of the same language. There's mutual encouragement of, man, I saw how you did that. That was great. No, I saw how you did this, and that was great. And they're attaching it to the values, and it's clear. The expectations of where we're driving and how hard we're pushing are clear. The boundaries for don't do this and don't do that are clear. If you've ever worked on one of those kinds of teams, it is awesome. And I'm a firm believer that the way you get there, at least one of the major pieces, is to make sure that mission and vision is clear, that target is there, and those guardrails, those values are there, and you're constantly revisiting those values, that you're celebrating people who are living out of those values, that you're challenging people who aren't living into those values, and maybe even rebuking people who are pushing against the values, because that can create a unity. It can create an energy within your team. And it helps not only with the unity, but with the clarity of how to move forward. So I want to talk now about some of those questions that I asked at the beginning. And let me first start by saying I've been on a number of different teams. I've been around some fantastic leaders. I've read some really good books on this. I've been to a bunch of different conferences. And by no way do I think that I am an expert at this. All these things that I'm going to share with you today, none of them are my original ideas. Every single one of them have been grabbed from somebody else and shaped and fashioned to fit the team that I'm on. And so you can take them, use them, modify them. You can push back against them. I'm okay with all of those things. So first, how to install staff values to craft a staff culture and then maintain them in your organization. Having values for the church helps direct the way in which you do church. And having staff values can help direct and unify your staff. You don't have to, again, recreate the wheel here. And there are a couple of things that I would recommend with instilling your staff values. First is teach them. Teach your staff values to your staff with the why. Don't leave out the why. Don't just teach the value. Teach why this value. And you can do this at a staff meeting or a staff outing or a staff retreat. If you are installing these for the very first time, I would highly recommend doing this on a staff retreat where you are away and you can get a nice big chunk of time to really pour into these. And I've found that a retreat really does work best when instilling or changing staff values. Secondly, reinforce them by celebrating people who live into them. We do this. We have a weekly staff survey that we have people fill out. It takes less than 10 minutes to fill out this staff survey. But one of the questions on there is, who do you see on the staff that is living into our staff operational values? And we have shorthand for those right there in the question. And people will go, man, you know what? I saw Tony living into this staff value. So it'll say, Tony, and then a short description of how Tony, one of our staff values, locking arms. Tony really locked arms with us this last week, and when we were in a crunch, he jumped in and really helped us accomplish what we needed to accomplish, even though it's not his ministry area, right? Celebrate that. And now the whole staff gets to see, look at that. That person was really living into that, and people will start to replicate that. The other thing that we do is we have a simple award that we hand out once a month. Our logo is a compass pointing to the northeast, and so we made this silly little plastic award that it's a golden compass, and we hand out that golden compass. We pass it around to people living into the staff operational values. And so once a month, whoever had the award will give it to somebody else on the staff, and we will celebrate that person in our all-staff meeting. It takes a couple of minutes, and there are some people that makes their entire month, that it's like, wow, this team saw me and is now celebrating me and how I'm living into the staff operational values. It's a simple thing that we do, but it goes a long way. And then keep people accountable for them. Yes, the positive, encouraging side ought to be the primary way that we're doing this, but accountability goes a long, long way. I do this through one-on-ones. When I see one of my staff members not living into one of our staff operational values, I notice, man, you've really been keeping to yourself lately, and we went through some hard times on the staff, and you didn't lock arms. Can you tell me why? Why you're not locking arms with us on this? Are you too busy? Are we too, it might be something external. Am I putting too much pressure on you to accomplish these other things that it feels like you don't have the time to lock arms with everybody else, right? And so we have these kind of discussions during our one-on-ones. And then also in my annual and my semi-annual reviews, I list out all the staff operational values. How do you feel like you are living into the staff operational values on a scale of 1 to 5? 1 being, man, I'm failing at these things, and 5, I'm killing it. I'm the pace setter for our staff in this staff operational value. And they rate themselves, and then I do the same thing on my annual review. Here's how I feel like you're doing. 3, man, there's a lot of room for improvement here. You're okay, but you're not doing great at this one. Or, man, you are the one pace setting for us. You're the one out in front, really showing us what it looks like to live into the staff operational value. So that's how to instill the values and maintain them. Next, managing your team differences with the different sizes for leadership teams that are volunteer versus paid. Again, based on my reading of the New Testament, especially Paul's writings, I think it's just really wise to lead with a team, to not lead solo. And so hopefully we're all leading with a team, and therefore managing a team applies to everybody in the room. With the whole volunteer and paid, how is it different when your team is volunteer versus paid? Well, lots. There's a lot of differences. Our team is mixed up of both. And so we have some pretty key people on our team that are volunteer. The guy that we have that is leading out for us when it comes to leadership development isn't paid. So how we lead him has to be very different than how we lead paid staff. The guy that is the head of our security is also a volunteer. Both these guys give us close to full-time hours some weeks, and they're completely volunteer. And so, they have their regular hours that I try to keep them accountable for, but the managing of them looks really different. And I think one of the key things for managing volunteers that our staff, volunteer staff, is buy-in. How are they bought in to what's happening? Are you giving them a voice on how those ministries are happening? And do you constantly put the mission, the vision, and the values in front of them? And I get the tension. I get the tension their time is so valuable, right? When I meet with this guy that's leading out with leadership for us, when I meet with Eric, I know his schedule is slammed and the time that he's giving to us is free. So I feel this tension of, I need to value this guy's time to the nth degree. So I just need to get to the point. Here's what I need you to do. Here's where you're killing it. Thanks so much. But if I step back and I look at okay, what is he doing for us and what does he need? What does he need from me? And what does he need from the organization to continue to feel like I am getting paid by being here? And I'll tell you, a huge piece of that is, why is he volunteering in the first place? He's volunteering because he has bought into the mission, the vision, and the values. He thinks it's worth it. This is something worthy of spending my life on. So for me not to point back to the mission and the vision and the values is actually pulling some of that value away instead of putting that value back in front of him and saying, look how you are spending your life and the benefit of you being here, giving us the hours that you're giving us the time and the energies. Look at the impact that you're making. So the way that we can pay our volunteers is to pay them with both keeping the mission, vision, and values alive in front of them and then showing how their work is accomplishing that mission, vision, and values. That's their pay. That's what they're looking for. Now, how is that different from staff? The staff also needs that, but to a less degree. Because a lot of their accountability is happening because, they're not going to get paid if they don't do the job, right? It is their day job. They are coming day in and day out, and such. So there is a sense in which that paycheck is some accountability. And so, yes, we still want to keep the mission, the vision, and the values in front of them, but it's not their paycheck. So the way in which we approach it is differently. And so I would encourage you with that. And with that, what is the role of encouragement and challenge with our people? This brings me to this area, and I think that this is an area that I missed for a really long time as a leader of people. I missed what does it mean to calibrate invitation and challenge, encouragement and rebuke. And a lot of us, and myself included, I always thought encouragement, invitation, good. Rebuke, challenge, bad. You must be doing something wrong if I have to do that. And I want to retool that for us. I think that accountability, I think rebuke and challenge is a good thing. How do we grow? How do we get better? Most of the time in my own life, it's somebody pointing something out and saying, you could be doing this better. And challenging me to get better. And so I think that this plays a massive role. And so I want to just take a second to look at how Jesus does this with one of his disciples. Because when I saw this in the text, I was like, oh, gosh, Jesus calibrates invitation and challenge perfectly. And I have a lot to learn from the way that he does this. And probably the clearest example in the text is his relationship with Peter. Peter is one of those guys that gets one of the biggest encouragement from anybody that Jesus ever talks to. One of the greatest encouragements that Jesus gives is to Peter. One of the greatest challenges that Jesus gives to anybody that he interacts with is Peter. And Jesus is constantly calibrating invitation and challenge with Peter. And sometimes it's back to back. Sometimes it's spread out. Right? He starts with Peter with a little bit of a challenge when he calls him. But then right on the other side of that, he heals his mother-in-law, which was one of his biggest challenges in his life at that time. As he's one of the few, or the only married disciple, right? And so he's got these things that he has to take care of at home, and yet he's going to leave home to go follow this rabbi that's going to travel all over. And so a huge encouragement, an invitational thing that Jesus does is to heal his mother-in-law so that he can feel freed up to go. Then later on, as all this is taking place with Peter, you have this massive encouragement. The biggest one, I would argue, that Jesus gives when Jesus is with his disciples and he says, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And he says, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for this can only be given to you from on high." Like, literally, you have been massively blessed by God the Father in this truth that he has revealed to you. Jesus just speaks this massive blessing on him. And then, Peter's like, "Man, I'm the dude. Look at this blessing I just got. I'm incredible. Look at all this encouragement that Jesus just gave me." And then Jesus, right on the tail end of this, is headed to the cross. And Peter's like, "Never." Right? He's all fired up. "Never will you go to the cross. We will defend you to the death," right? And he's like, "Get behind me, Satan." Whoa, wait, what just happened? You just gave the biggest encouragement you've ever given to any of your disciples, and then the biggest challenge. Peter, your eyes are on the wrong thing all of a sudden. Yes, this truth has been revealed to you, but you're doing the wrong thing with it. And here's a massive challenge to get you to flip around and see my ways and God's ways are not your ways. It is the way to the cross. And so what do we do with this? How do we learn from this calibration of invitation and challenge? Well, I think we need to put it into place with our people. As we're called to disciple our team, just like Jesus was discipling his team to change the world, we're called to do the exact same thing as the leaders of our team. And so that means every single person in this room needs to be looking for opportunities to encourage our people and to challenge our people. Because I'm convinced that the growth that we see in the life of Peter, from being the guy that's like, "Oh my gosh, this is the flakiest disciple. He's more likely to stab someone and cut someone's ear off than he is to multiply disciples," to he's the leader of the church. Like, wait, what? Upon this rock I'm going to build my church? Mr. Stabby guy? Like, come on. Like, the guy with the short fuse? Like, are we serious, Jesus? And he's like, "Yeah. Yes, we are." And so this tool of invitation and challenge and the way in which Jesus does it just massively matures Peter to an incredible leader that we see in the book of Acts. So how do we go from Mr. Hot-tempered, stabby fisherman guy to the leader of the church? Through discipleship. Through this discipleship of invitation and challenge in the life of Peter. And so I want to give you a simple tool that I'm a visual person. And so visual tools like this are really helpful to me as I think about, as I'm sitting down with my staff, and I'm thinking through, okay, what's in front of us that I want to develop in this person, or an issue that we need to deal with, and how do I calibrate invitation and challenge for how they will receive it, and how I get them towards growth and not to regression or not moving in the opposite direction. So how do I get them to move towards the target? How do I get them to move towards the mission and vision? How do I get them to live into the church values and the staff operational values? Well, I got to calibrate. Sometimes it's an invitational thing. Sometimes it's a challenge. Sometimes it's both. And so how can I think about this visually? And so if we put this on a matrix, and this vertical line being invitation, and the horizontal being challenge, and we think of this being low challenge, this being low invitation, and we break this thing into its quadrants, what do we have when we have really low challenge and really low invitation? We have apathy. We have people that like, man, there's no encouragement to do anything. There's no challenge for me to be any better. I just get to whatever, right? And so this is a quadrant of apathy. And what do we have when we have really low challenge, but a ton of invitation? We have a culture that's just cozy. It's warm. Man, they just love me. They don't challenge me. It's just great. Like, we're all sitting on couches, sipping on coffee. This is the life. It's cozy. Now, what do we have when we have low invitation? There's not a lot of encouragement or any of that, but man, there's a ton of challenge. That is burnout. We're headed towards burnout in this quadrant. Now, what about when we have medium to high challenge and medium to high invitation? We have a quadrant of growth. We can't help but get better. So if I was to put Peter's life on this, I would say he started in the cozy quadrant with Jesus. He felt awfully free to say whatever he wanted to say, do whatever he wanted to do. But then, all of a sudden, Jesus is laying some challenge in on Peter. And he's starting to feel like, whoa, I don't know if I can handle this. This is pretty heavy. Like, he's headed towards burnout. And then all of a sudden, he experiences a massive amount of growth. And so I think that this is the normal trajectory for people that start in the cozy quadrant with us. We start here, we go through this, we experience this, and then we turn the corner. So that's the experience of the person that starts in cozy. Now, what is Jesus doing this whole time with the life of Peter? He's actually doing both invitation and challenge with Peter the whole time. He's trying to get him into that growth quadrant. But the experience of going from cozy into this quadrant doesn't just go here. Because we were comfortable. We didn't have any of this challenge before. And now all of a sudden we got challenged. So for the person receiving it, they drop into that, man, this is hard and I don't know if I'm going to make it. Now, what about the person that starts in this quadrant? And it's all challenge. It feels like, man, life is just super heavy. And then they have somebody come into their life and they start offering invitation. Well, I think the line is the same. It just starts here, it dips into cozy, and then it goes over here. And that's because all of a sudden they're experiencing, why are you doing all this lovey-dovey stuff? I thought we have things to do and meetings to have and things to accomplish and boxes to check off. And now all of a sudden you're taking me out to coffee and lunch and we're just talking about life? What are we cozying up to one another here? And some of us, if we're honest, we naturally fall into one of these quadrants. Everybody in this room is either more naturally invitational or more naturally challenge. I have had to learn this the hard way. I am naturally much more challenging than I am invitational. And that means I got to work really hard to be invitational with my staff. Because I'm pretty high capacity. I like to get things done. I do like to check those boxes off, and I love it at the end of the day if I got a clear whiteboard. And so when I have staff that I'm meeting with and I'm like, hey, we set out all these goals and you haven't started any of them, my natural inclination is to lean in. Let's go. Let's figure out what's happening, figure out solutions, put new systems in place. You may have to work some overtime to make this thing happen. You need to find some more volunteers. You need to work with these leaders that aren't doing this. You need to fire that person and promote that person. Let's go. And what do they experience? Burnout. So I got to calibrate because of my own natural weaknesses. Now, there's other people that I work with that are much more invitational. I got a guy on my team that he is so invitational. He's like, man, do you want to play a board game over lunch? We can talk about life, see how things are going. I'm like, bro, no, I got stuff to do. And when I'm having a hard time, he's the first guy to call me. Like, hey, man, I heard a little tinge in your voice today. Like, that guy's invitational is just through the roof. And I constantly feel like he's trying to put me in the cozy quadrant with him. But if we're intentional about this, if we're intentional about trying to get our relationships on our staff into that growth quadrant, we will see maturity, we will see development happen, and we will see a staff that gets more and more and more unified. As I've been doing this with our staff over the last 4 years, this is the greatest staff team I've ever worked on. And guess what? When I first came in, there was several people on the team that I'm like, this is not going to work. This is just not going to work. And some of those people have absolutely surprised me. One of the guys on our staff that owns our staff operational values probably better than anybody else was one of the people that I'm like, that's going to be my third fire when I came in. I'm like, that guy's life is a mess. And all the mess of that life is going to spill over into the lives of everybody else. But instead, I was encouraged, hey, don't get ahead of yourself. And I was like, okay, let's calibrate invitation and challenge with this guy. Let's get these things moving. All of a sudden, we started to see greater and greater maturity. Saw him kind of giving more and more things over to the Lord, surrendering more things. He went through a messy divorce, leaned into that with the Lord, was super open and honest with our staff. He just chose trust to be open and honest with our staff. And he took all of our staff operational values, lived into them, put them all in front of the staff, and we were like, that's our champion of our staff operational values. How in the world could I fire that guy? He's the most incredible one that's creating culture on my team. And now he's my champion of like half my staff operational values. All because Drew and I leaned in on both invitation and challenge, and a lot of it. A lot. We poured into that guy a lot. Outside office hours, meeting with him, counseling him through his nasty divorce about how he can be a better dad, how he can heal from these things, how he needs to not leave community, how he needs to lean into his relationship with the Lord and spend more time in the Word and more time in prayer. All of that invitation, and then a lot of challenge. Man, you need to look yourself in the mirror and say, this divorce that's happening, what role did you play in it? What did you do at failing as a husband and as a dad? And how can you grow from those things? Where did you fail surrendering to the Lord in your marriage? Where did you fail surrendering being a dad? And there's like really hard, very challenging conversations. And then when he came back, calibrating, invitation and challenge, invitation and challenge, invitation and challenge. And he stuck around through all of it, even though we leaned in hard. But it was because he felt loved the whole time. He knew it was for his good. He knew that we were pointing towards his growth, that it was for his good and not just for ours. And now, man, the goodness of all that he's gone through has spilled over into the rest of our staff. And so don't be so quick to make a judgment call like myself. Lean into some invitation and challenge and see if your staff, whether volunteer or paid, will lean into those things. Because you might just take a hot-headed, stabby fisherman and make them one of the leaders of your church. Next piece that I want to talk about is the role that goals play in how we manage our team, because it gives us a tangible thing to aim at and hold our team accountable to. I think it's important for all of us to have long-term goals, not just the short-term ones. And so we have our yearly goals that we're aiming at as a church. We like to break those things down into each of the different ministry areas that we have. And so, as we leaned into prayer this last year, the year before, we knew we were doing this because he planned out so far in advance. We went through a book together as a staff about prayer, which then primed the pump for our leaders to be ready to get into. When we got into that sermon series and now our ministry areas, we're starting to lean into prayer. All of our staff were ready for that. And so we had this goal of prayer on the horizon. This is like happening next year. So what do we do now with our staff to prep our staff to be ready to then lead out in this when we start to preach it? And so having that long-term goal was hugely beneficial for us because it allowed us to backfill all the development that needed to happen to lead out in the initiatives and the activities that we were going to have. And now it's paying huge dividends. So having those goals is really helpful, but it takes time. And you got to know, what are the primary things, what are the primary goals that we're going to go after this year? Because we can't do them all. I can't develop my staff in every single area all the time. We got to choose one or two things each year, and that means we got to be patient. It would be fantastic if we could lean into, okay, we're going to develop all of our people in Bible, in Bible study methods, all of our people in exegesis, all of our people in prayer, all of our people in community, all of our people in local mission, and all of our people in global. No, you can't do all of that at once. And so you got to set goals out there that are achievable and realistic, and then hold your people accountable to it. So, again, we sit down, have those goals for the church, then I go back, sit with each of the different ministry areas and talk about what does this look like in your ministry. We set goals, and then we break them into bite-sized chunks. What development needs to happen so we're ready and our volunteers are ready to lead out in that initiative? Okay, this kind of development. How long will that take? Okay, so we need that much time. How long are these activities going to happen? We've got to break that down. And so managing our team sometimes is just thinking about not just what's next, but what's next after what's next, so that we can develop our team and get our team there so that they can develop their people and get their people there to do that. It's once was said, great leaders don't just think about what's next. They think about what's next after what's next. And phenomenal leaders are ones that are thinking about not just what's next for what's next, but the next thing, so that they can develop the leaders who are great leaders that are thinking about what's next up next. If that's not confusing, I don't know what is. You got to be a great leader to understand. And then lastly, I want to talk about trust and communication. Every single one of us, when we talk to a couple that is struggling in their marriage, I can almost guarantee you it comes down to those two things: trust and communication. Trust and communication. Trust and communication. But I don't know about you, but most of the staffs I've been on, those aren't the conversations we're having. Why? It's absolutely the core of how we operate as human beings: trust and communication. And so I want to just challenge all of us in this area, because if your team trusts each other, if your team has open communication, both about what is happening in their life, but also what's happening in the lives of their teams, what's happening in their personal lives, ministry life, and their ministry team areas, if you can have the kind of trust that you can be just real and authentic, you are going to have a team that is a lot more healthy, a lot more unified, a team that will naturally lean into both invitation and challenge and not push back, because they're going to trust you. And so, where do we start? In so many areas, I think, with our teams, it's a bit of a grassroots thing, right? And it starts broadly, except for this area. This is an area that lives and dies with the key leader. Now, I'm grateful that I stepped in to a staff where the senior leader was already leaning into trust and open communication. Because if you want to wrestle through some really hard things, like a guy on your staff going through a messy divorce that's probably going to spill into the whole church, the only way you can do that is to have trust and really good communication. That they're not pulling their punches and you're not pulling your punches, that you can really wrestle through these things and talk about the very real ramifications of that, not just for their life and not just for your life, but the staff's life, for the key volunteers, for the elders, for the whole church. And the only way to do that is to top down. If people don't trust their senior leader, they got to go. If people can't be honest and real with the senior leader, you got a lot of work to do, and if they won't lean into it, they got to go. This is one of the hardest things that I've had to do in the last 4 years of being on the staff. Is we sat down with a resident, and this resident was extremely gifted. I mean, this guy, I'm like, this guy's going to be somebody. Like, he's got some gifts. But we started to make some calls and ask him to lean into some things that were some character pieces. This guy's competency in the ministry, next level. No lid. But character, I was like, oof, don't like that. We got to put our finger on that, because the only way we're going to build trust around here is if we're leaning into some good character. And so I sat down with this guy and I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And he's like, well, I don't trust you to have that conversation with me. And so I went, okay, well, I'm the executive pastor, so I'm not the top. Are you willing to have that conversation with our senior leader? Do you trust him? No, I don't trust him to have this conversation. So you're unwilling to have that conversation with me or our senior leader? Yep. Do you trust any of our elders to have that conversation? No. They don't know me. I looked at this guy and I'm like, man, you're so gifted and talented. And I think if you're willing to go after this one thing, you have huge potential in the ministry. But apart from that, you're not going to make it, man. And I said, what I hear you saying is that you don't trust me, you don't trust our elders, and you don't trust our lead pastor. And he said, yes. And I said, then you just step down, because this staff trusts each other and is open in communication with those people. And he's like, are you serious? Dead serious, man. And I said, I am open and willing to have that conversation whenever you want to have that conversation. And if it's not me and it's somebody else of our senior leaders, man, we are here for you and we want that because we love you and we see such potential in you. But if you're unwilling to do that, I'm not willing to sacrifice our staff. I'm not willing to compromise the trust and the open communication that we built on this staff and where we are headed. This kills that. So I had to let him go. Right on the tail end of that, one of our key staff members was very close to this individual and was in an uproar about all of this. And it pinpointed the lack of trust that person had for the hard calls that we were making too. And so I had to let her go too. Brutal conversations. So many people in the congregation coming up and saying, you just ruined our kids' ministry and our next-gen ministry by eliminating some of the most gifted people we have had in these positions in years. A couple years later, that lady I fired came back and apologized. I didn't see it. I needed to work in that area. God really used that in my life. And I still got some more stuff to work through in that character issue. And I feel really bad for the other gentleman that you let go because he still doesn't see it. But I saw it. I'm a better person for it. They're still at our church. This is like, boom, what? All because we just leaned into trust and communication and said, we're not going to compromise on this one. We've worked too hard. It's too important for our staff and for our church. Because this is the cornerstone of relationships. And so we've gone all in, and I'm so grateful to have elders and a lead pastor that leaned into this before I got there, because, man, it's hard work, but man, is it worth it. It just brings so much fruit. And so it's worth it. Build trust. Be the one that says, I'll go first. I'll be the vulnerable one. Here's what's going on in my life. Here's what I'm struggling with. Here's what I need to be kept accountable for. Be open with what's going on in your life. Now, granted, that doesn't mean every single little dark corner of your life. My hope is that you have somebody on your elder team or somebody on your staff team that you can share that with, so that that trust and that communication is at least with one of those people, and you can model that. But that next level, that should be shared with your staffs, in my opinion. This is the first staff that I've seen it to this degree, and it is also the healthiest staff I've ever been on. And now, man, we fight for this with every hire. We say, this is who we are. If you're coming on, you're going to be vulnerable with these people. So know that you're not just being invited into a job, you're being invited into a community. And this community does life together. We live life on life. We live life in community, and we live life on mission. And so this isn't just a job you punch in and punch out. This is a community that is going to shape you. And so if you don't want to be like these people, there's a great church down the road that would probably accept you. And so fight for this. Champion it. Be the first in your organization to build that trust and that communication, because it is key. All right. A couple of tools. We want to make this really practical along with the invitation and challenge matrix. One of the greatest leadership tools that I've been given is a leadership square. I use this thing on a weekly basis in every single one of my one-on-ones, in all my discipleship relationships, in my life groups, in my times with my people. I use the leadership square, and it's really simple. It's a square. So the upper leg of this, here's our start point. We're moving in this direction, then this direction, and then finally in this direction. And this first leg of leadership development is very high direction. It's very high example, and it is basically let out by I do, and you watch and take notes. And this is the first, right, L1 kind of leadership of I do, high example, high direction, and the person is just following you and taking really good notes. And then you want to turn that first corner into the second phase, and this is where high imitation needs to happen. This is where high accessibility is needed. This new leader that you're developing or person you're mentoring or discipling needs a lot of your time. And this is marked by I do and you help. And so this is the second movement. Then you move into a third movement. And this third movement is a very difficult corner to turn with a lot of the people that we're developing. And so that L2 corner is to the L3 is pretty hard, and I'll get to that in a minute. And that's because it now switches from I do to you do, and I help you. And so as this person now starts doing, you need to be in discussion with them about how they're doing it. And they need to be growing in their confidence on there and competence. And so a lot of times as we're leading people and they're watching us do and they're helping us do, right? I still remember the first time one of my interns, I had them teach for me. And I was like, all right, it's your turn. They're like, whoa. I'm doing it now? Like, I got to be the guy that's up there? Like, are you sure? Like, you're here. I'm like, yeah, I'll be right there. Safety net, I'm right there. You don't need to worry about anything. So I'm going to give them a lot of access to me. Hey, you know what? Let's talk through your entire message and walk through that, right? And so this idea of you're going to do it, but I'm right here to help you. You're not alone. And then you turn this last corner finally to you do, and now I watch and take notes. And I take notes, why? Because I'm still going to develop them from a distance. I'm going to cheer them on. I'm going to calibrate invitation and challenge now as they're doing. And so I have found this hugely beneficial because I don't know about you, but there are certain things on here I do naturally. And there are other things on here that I would rather, hey, like I'm not great at this I do you watch piece. I'm not great at the inviting new people to come and be a part. This is very invitational right here. I'm much more like, I like to jump right over here to I do you help. So I'm like, hey, you want to be involved in the ministry? Come help me. And they're like, whoa, 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 I have no idea what I'm doing. What do you mean I'm supposed to help you? I'm like, oh, yeah. First quadrant. I gotta start with I do you watch and take notes. The other thing for me is I love this corner because it's a really good challenge. People love to, you know what, I'll help. Oh, we all do? Nope, I want to go back. I want to go back to just helping you do it. And so I'm good at this, but I'm also terrible at this. I want to keep helping them. I'm like, no, you need more development. No, you need more development. And people are like, let me go. Like, let me just go do this thing. God had a sense of humor, and one of the first senior pastors I worked for loved to do the L1 to L3 drop, where he would like say, oh, come see what I'm doing. Okay, hey, this is how I teach. You need to take really good notes about how I teach, okay? Okay, yeah, I'm going to take really good notes on how you teach. This was me for him. And he's like, okay, yeah, this is how I preach. I'm like, okay, this is how you preach. And he's like, okay, so you paid really good attention this last Sunday. I'm like, yeah, I got pages of notes. Awesome, you're preaching next Sunday. Boom! It was no I do and he helps me. It was just, you're up, and like sink or swim, buddy. Whoop! Don't be that person, because that made me want to just say, nope, can't do that. And then the other thing that he did was he would drop you to here, and then he would like drop you here, and then just be like, okay, now go gather other people to do the same thing. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. What do you mean I'm supposed to lead other people in this? And so really helpful to be thinking through, where are the people that I'm leading? Where are their tendencies? Where do they want to run back, right? Sometimes they'll have a failure in they're doing and you're helping them, and they just want to run back to, why don't I just watch you do it and keep taking notes, right? Or you'll have those people that are really drivers that are just like, I got this, just set me free. I got this. Let me run the entire missions program and spend $100,000 this next year. I got a heart and vision, you know? Or you got that guy that's like, put me on stage. I got a song in my heart and a guitar on my back. Like, let me just lead, you know? You're like, no, we need to develop you before you get there. And so you'll have people that have natural tendencies in these things. And we need to take all those people around the square and be intentional about pointing to where we are. Why? So that they can then reproduce their leadership in the lives of other people, right? Because we're not just about making leaders. We're not just about making disciples. We're about making disciples who then go make disciples. If we don't give them reproducible models, they're on their own. And so they need to take good notes when they're watching what we're doing. They need to then get an experience of doing it before they have to do it on their own. And then when they're doing it, they need us to come alongside them and say, great job here. This is the invitational piece, right? You killed it on this piece. Here's the other piece. Man, you did so good in the way that you brought out the scriptures, but man, you never landed the plane. There was no application. And so let me come alongside you and help you with that application piece. So let's take our people through all of of the four sides of the leadership square. Next is this axiom that we live by all the time: celebrate what you want to replicate. We do this through our staff survey. We do this through our golden compass. We do this all the time in my one-on-ones. I'm going to celebrate what's happening in my people's lives that I want to see replicated in the lives of the other people that they're ministering to. So if generosity is your thing, man, when you see generosity, celebrate that generosity. When we were working through prayer as a church, every time I saw one of my staff people grab, like somebody would bring something up, they're like on their way to something, somebody would be like, hey man, pray for me this week, I got this. Hey, can we just pause and pray for that right now? I got somewhere to be, but can I just pray for you real quick? They pray for them. Man, that one-on-one I had with them, I would celebrate that because I want to see more of that in their lives. And so celebrate what you want to replicate. The other tools, job descriptions. Really hard to keep people accountable to their jobs if they don't have good job descriptions. And so I have job descriptions for all my volunteers too. Every single one of our volunteers has a volunteer job description. That is a lot of work. Don't start from scratch. I'm going to give you, if you want our job descriptions, both our full-time, our part-time, our volunteer job descriptions, if you want those, I will share all of that with you. I created a SharePoint website, and I'll give all that with you. For some reason, I can't share it. I have to put your email in there to share it with you, but I'll give you all those. The other thing, performance reviews. They need to review themselves, in my opinion, and then their supervisor needs to do that with them as well. And then I also have a one-on-one template that I use because I want to make sure that in each of my one-on-ones that I'm doing, I'm connecting with them personally about what's going on in their life. I'm connecting with their development stuff, and we're working through all their ministry areas. And I give them access to the one-on-one template as well so that they can add things to our one-on-one times. But I send that to them with, okay, here's all my items. What are your items that you want to add? And I have a template on that website as well as some podcasts and things that I found really helpful in managing staff. So it's 11:08. So do I do questions now, or do we wait to Q&A because we're going straight to Q&A after? Okay, perfect. So any questions? Yeah, so I do one-on-ones every other week with all of my paid staff, and I meet once a month with my volunteer staff. Yeah, so that's my rhythm. And then my annual reviews are made up of all the notes from my entire year. So what I do when I get to my annual reviews for my employees, both paid and volunteer, what I do is I review all my challenges and all my invitations that I've given throughout the entire year, and those things make up the notes for my annual review, so there are no surprises. So when I go and I'm like, hey, as you know, we've been talking this year about your development, and I have been encouraging you to lean into these weaknesses, and you haven't done it. And so we're going to mark you low on this area, and that's something you need to work on in this next year, and we're going to hold you accountable to that. And here's the things that you killed it in, right? All year we've been talking about how good you've been at this. And so that way it just makes them feel like no surprises. Oh, and you're paying attention to my whole year. And so I may end up going semi-annual with my staff because a couple of my staff members have been like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And so I'm like, yeah, I review our notes. Clearly you don't. So I may move to semi-annual with some of my staff, but for the most part, that's my rhythm.